as it's getting toward the holiday season, we might be thinking about buying Christmas presents and thinking about how much our bills might be racking up and having bought all these presents for our loved ones this holiday season. And maybe you have time to think about what you might be doing in 2025. And I think in this year, it's a good time to start thinking about our financial goals for the future, even if you're still busy wrapping presents and it's a little bit hectic right now, but it's never too early to start thinking about the future. And you're listening to the Investing Mastermind podcast. I'm Michelle Marki.
And I'm Signe Lønholdt.
And Sienna, how do you set your financial goals for the future? Like, what would you think about your goals in 2025?
So what I would do in order to set a goal, especially if you're new to setting goals, I have longer term goals, but I also do suggest that you should set some short-term goals. And especially if you're new at setting goals, it's a good idea to set short-term goals. So for example, for next year. And way that I've done it in the past is that I allocate some time to actually sit myself in a comfortable environment where I don't get, I have kids, so, that the kids aren't coming and wanting to ask me a bunch of things. So just, with a nice cup of tea or hot chocolate and, a blanket and in a nice environment. And, I do just a little bit of breathing or meditation in order to, get focused. Then I set a timer for 2 minutes, and then I just write down everything that I dream of and what I want to accomplish, anything that comes to mind that I would really desire or want or need. And I brainstorm and just write it down. And once the timer's up, I stop doing that. The next step is to then look at everything I've written down and then trying to kind of set a time frame on. So some dreams might be way out in the future. I think, okay, this is maybe 10 years out in the future or 5 years out in the future. And then maybe there are some of them that could be accomplished within 3 years. And then there are some that, okay, I can see that within the next year, I can accomplish these goals. So I put a little number on the side on, each of the goals. Then I go through them again once I've kind of assigned a time frame. And then I kind of feel, okay, which ones are most important to me? Because for me, I can't have a lot of goals. I found that if I have way too much within a year, I just don't know where to focus. So I try within a year to just have one goal, or it doesn't really get done. But maybe you're different out there listening to this podcast and you think, I can have multiple things going on at the same time. Then you should definitely do that. But for me, I'm like, I need to kind of feel, okay, what is most important to me here? And then I set that as a goal. And what I do is also, I will either journal about it. So trying to, journal about, okay, I actually already accomplished this, and writing a bit of, from that point of view where I already achieved the goal. And I'll also do what is called a vision board. And I use this free program that's called Canva, Canva, where I take photos or, inspirational quotes and put in there in that vision board. So I work a lot with that. And then I usually make one for my phone. So when I look at my phone, I can see my vision board, or it could be on your computer. It needs to be somewhere where you actually see your vision board. Some people print it out and hang it on the wall, and you can do that too. So I talked a lot about my goal now and very detailed. So Michelle, how do you go about it? Do you want to share your process of how you set goals?
Yeah, and I'm very impressed with your goal setting process. I think I might try to include some of your tips in how I might do it in the future, because I just sometimes write things down on a notepad. So if I'm thinking about next year, I might write a few things that I think would be nice to accomplish. And these things could be everyday goals that people might have. Like if you have loans and you're trying to pay them down, when I had loans like student loans and a car loan, I used to map out, okay, this is how much of a term I'm signed up for the next few years. And I would look at how much money I'm getting in from my job. And then I would try to plan out, can I pay this off even sooner than when it's due? So even if it's due in 5 years from now, can I actually pay more toward the principal? And then eventually, like, I pay less interest and I can pay off the loan sooner. So that used to be one of my financial goals when I was younger. So I would map that out of practically how long will it take over doing this in a spreadsheet, over how many months it would take. And then as I got older, I am debt free and I try to focus on other financial goals like investing. Like I wanted to achieve a better financial performance record. So, for example, if say I want to achieve 15% in getting stock market gains, I would try to set that goal for myself for the year. And it didn't always work out. So some years I underperformed, actually. I went below my financial goal, but it's important to set some kind of goal that you're trying to work toward, because that having that goal motivated me to start figuring out how should I invest differently to reach that goal. And I didn't just choose 15% because of me. I actually learned that from Phil Town at Rule One Investing. So that goal was just sort of put out there. Before, I would have had no idea of what should be something I should strive for. So even if it's not something you intuitively come up with, but you in the process of learning and reading or watching educational materials, you just come across a goal of like, huh, I think I would like to try to meet that goal if possible. That's okay too. So, wherever we get sources of inspiration, that's all right in my mind. So it's something that, like you're doing, Sina, I would write down somewhere. And even though I haven't always made a vision board myself, I wrote it down in a spreadsheet or wrote it down in a notepad. And I would try to somewhat track some of my progress toward it and see how I'm progressing. And I keep track of all of my expenses and also my income and my investments. So every week I'm tracking, are my financial goals improving? So even though I haven't set a hard number of, I need to have this amount of money in my accounts by the end of the year, I can just marvel at, as long as I'm making positive progress, I'm happy. So as long as I'm not going backwards, like there was one year I went backwards because I made some bad trades and my net assets actually went down that year. So to me, as long as I'm not doing that again, I'm happy to just keep a positive increase in all of my assets. That's what mainly my goal is, the status quo of nowadays, of just always staying in the positive, staying in the black instead of going in the red. That's what generally informs my overall goal financially. And I have smaller goals in life. Like right now, I just want to figure out basic things that I think a lot of people are trying to figure out for themselves, like, their housing situation, or if they're trying to do family planning. Some of those things I have some personal goals in, and people just have to think about what's important to them, what's priority to you, what do you want out of next year? Do you want a better job? Do you want to earn more income? Do you want to start a family? Do you want to buy a house? Like, there are so many kinds of goals that are both personal and somewhat financially related that we could think about what's important to us and then follow the steps like Sina suggested. And I also want to segue, Sina, into how would you recommend people do budgeting? Because I haven't always been the best at budgeting. I kind of just, as long as I can afford my lifestyle. So in other words, I just tend to live within my means. That's kind of my way of budgeting, is as long as I'm spending way less than what I'm bringing in, that's sort of my general budget. But I haven't always been good about actually having a real budget. So what would you suggest?
So for my business, I've already done budgeting for next year. What I focus on with my budget is particularly my expenses in the business. I can say from a private point of view, what we've done here is the sort of the same thing. We have figured out, okay, so, listed all our expenses and doing it on an annual basis. So, with school, the expenses we have with, not necessarily school, but after school activity programs, food, utilities, all of those things, trying to write that down and figure out, okay, what are our annual expenses on insurance and utilities and all of these things. And then we've said, okay, so we need to actually allocate this amount of money into an account where all of our expenses are kind of being pulled from that account. So every month we put in the same amount of money that we've calculated. Okay, this is actually what we need to cover. So we do that at the end of a year, and then we're ready for the next year with, that kind of basis that is going to carry on throughout the year. So that's how we do it. And that means that I'm not doing monthly budgeting or kind of trying to follow up or anything. It's kind of done in the beginning of the year. And then we have savings so that if anything happens out of the blue, that's when we pull from the savings. Like, for example, vacation is not a part of that account. It's more, the daily expenses or, everyday necessities that is actually coming from that account. And then all the extra is coming from our savings. So that's how we kind of do it. So we don't necessarily look at the budget account or whatever you would call it. It's just money being funneled into that account and then also going out. So that's how we do it privately. But for my business, I do keep a budget. And what I do is I've already done my 2025 budget for the business, but then I kind of follow up every quarter to just see, am I on track? But it's really focused on expenses to make sure that I know which expenses are coming so that I'm not surprised that, oh my goodness, I have this large expense coming up and how am I going to cover that? So yeah, already looking into some of those things for 2025 to ensure that, everything is taken care of, because you never know what you're going to earn. So you need to kind of already be thinking about, okay, what do I need to earn? What could I put aside now to cover some of those expenses? That's where I'm coming from when it comes to budgeting. So even though it's a business budget, maybe some of you could could use that too in your private household thing. But there's a couple of ideas there to how to go about it.
Yeah, and actually that brings up a great point about if we want to understand some of what our everyday expenses are as consumers in our personal lives, we can go back and download, say, our credit card spending information. So we could take that information, upload it into some apps, or even if you want to just bust out a spreadsheet and figure it out yourself of either how much you spend per month or per quarter. And similarly to how you're tracking your expenses for your business, people can do that for themselves. Like, say, how much did somebody spend going out to restaurants, like eating out? And you could take a measure of that, like, oh, I notice I go out more in the summertime because it's nice and I feel like going out because it's summer, whereas maybe we pull back in the winter because it's cold and you don't feel like leaving the house. So maybe you don't eat out as much, but maybe you now order in more. And so you could measure some of that. So a lot of what we're talking about in this episode is about setting a goal for yourself and then defining what the metrics for those are. So you can identify, depending on what your goal is, if your goal is to spend less on eating out next year, you can identify, okay, how much did I spend this year in 2024? And then let's say it's $10,000 you ate out this year. Then you could say, okay, I want to see if I can achieve half of that next year. So I'm only going to eat out half as much. So I'm going to set a budget that my eating out expenses for 2025 are only $5,000. So if you think about it like that, you can make better decisions about, okay, on average, when I spent $10,000 on eating out in 2024, that means I went to a restaurant 4 times a week or something like that. I have no idea. I'm just making up figures. But maybe if you need to cut it in half, instead of going out to a restaurant 4 times a week, that means now you only go out to a restaurant 2 times a week next year. So you can define the metrics of your goal, then break it down into what are the practical steps to accomplish that goal.
Yeah, and I also want to say, because maybe some of you guys that are listening out there are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not doing that stuff at all. And I used to be like that. I had no idea, no control, living paycheck to paycheck. I think we talked about it in the past as well. So, it's just getting started. Whatever you need to do to take that small steps to get this in order. And the way I started out is exactly like you said earlier, Michelle. I looked at my annual expenses from the past at my credit card and what did I spend money on? And then I started prioritizing, well, all of these things, it's not really that important to me. I would rather want, something in the future rather than the instant gratification of, as I've been talking about in the past, a takeaway coffee or something like that. So the first step is really a good idea to look back. What are you spending money on? Is there somewhere where you should not be spending money on that anymore? Could you maybe prioritize? And then the next step potentially could be, changing it for the future. And maybe in the beginning, it's necessary to do a budget and follow up every month and really being rigid. I mean, I was like that right after. I was super focused on my budget and doing a lot of budgeting and keeping track of my money. But now I'm more loose because it's integrated in me. As you can also hear, we have, some certain things that are already in place here. So it just happens automatically and we don't have to think about it necessarily all the time. But it took some steps to get there. It just did not magically happen from one day to the other. So it's taken those small steps and it's very gratifying once you start doing it. And, remember to pat yourself on the back and celebrate also sometimes, your progress, changing your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it is gradual. You can't go from having all these debts and student loans and everything you have to pay for, and it's overwhelming, to now everything is just easy peachy, and you just sit on a beach sipping a cocktail. It takes work to get to that point, like you said. So, take it one thing at a time. Like, start somewhere that, based on your goals, like what would you like to change and how do you want a better future? Because, for example, maybe someone wants to have more vacations next year. Okay, so what's going to have to change? Maybe that means eating out less. Like I just used that restaurant example of spending less eating out, but then now you can afford a great vacation somewhere else, or you can invest that money instead of spending it on food you could be making at home. So there are so many different places you could go depending on what's important to you, like Signe said. And one thing that I realized is buying things does not make me happy. So that's something that I came to realize over time, is you don't have to spend money to actually have happiness in life. And I think that's a powerful mentality that I have, and it's helped rein in some of my spending of like, do I really need that? Like I decided I'm better off not having more things in my life. So it's sort of counterintuitive, but sometimes the less stuff we have in our lives, the happier we might be.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I don't know if has come with age or what has happened, but definitely I do not need as much as I felt I needed when I was younger. So just, loving yourself and, growing as a person is more important than things, in my opinion. Do you have any closing remarks, Michelle? Anything you want to end the episode with?
I mean, just that, yeah. I mean, for 2025, think about what's important, what you want for yourself, and write them down. It helps reinforce, because if you only keep it in your head, you might like not really stick with it. But the more that we write down the goal and the metrics that we'll use to measure our progress toward the goal, the better off we'll be. So with that, I'm hoping everybody has a great end of the year and a great beginning to 2025.
That's an awesome way to end the episode.
Till next time.
If you enjoyed the show and found the content informational, we would be super grateful if you would leave us a review and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you automatically get new episodes in your feed. We publish a new show every Tuesday.
The contents of the Investing Mastermind podcast are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this is investing advice, and if you need help in your personal situation, please consult with a professional.